know that the slides and the recording from today's session will be available after the call to all attendees. It will probably be later this afternoon or early Monday morning that that email gets sent to you. It takes a little bit of time on our end to actually process the recording. So stay tuned. That message will be coming from me, which is Kaylee Fontana again. And we also want to make sure that you guys are asking questions. Melanie is a wealth of knowledge, so I'm sure after today's session you will have many, many questions that you would like to ask her. So please enter those in the Q&A box, which is on the right-hand side of the WebEx panel. Just so you know, too, we're going to be holding all of the questions until the conclusion of the event, just to make sure that we give Melanie enough time to go through her presentation. If you have any questions after the event, please feel free to send a note to marketing@teletracking.com, and we'll try to respond within 24 hours to those questions. And last but not least, we want to encourage everybody to follow us on social media. We are very active on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and we have a great YouTube channel. So a lot of the stuff that you'll see about Melanie and her success and Carillion story is found on our social networks, so be sure to go ahead and follow us. So I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Joy Avery, who will actually go through a quick bio of Melanie, and then we'll get started. Thanks for being here. Joy?
Kaylee. Hi, everyone. As Kaylee said, this is Joy Avery with TeleTracking. I'm truly excited to introduce to you our colleague and our client partner, Melanie Morris. She's Senior Director of Emergency Services, including Carillion Transfer and Communications Center, better known as CTAC, Carillion Clinic in Roanoke, Virginia. We'll be discussing disaster readiness from both the hospital operations and the regulatory compliance standpoint. She will share the current regs and how you can better prepare your healthcare system for a disaster situation that might strike at any moment. Before I do that, I wanted to give you a little bit of more background into the how and the why TeleTracking has migrated deeper into the disaster readiness arena. As we seem to be experiencing more disasters these days, both natural and man-made. The way is easy. Our mission at TeleTracking is no patient waits for the care they need. We're the leaders in building out more operational command centers in the U.S. and the U.K., helping coordinate care across healthcare systems, expand access to care, and continually improving outcomes. The how, why not get into the space and the how? And we already know we've had that disaster patient attribute in place for years now to help you track incoming patients in relation to any disaster. However, we were challenged in 2017 via Hurricane Harvey with a single email from our client partner, Susan Kilgore at Methodist Healthcare in San Antonio for help. We knew immediately that we had a tremendous opportunity to dig deeper, opportunities to also track family members, shelter seekers, and even our staff. That was no longer enough. The tracking team has since partnered with many of you guys to develop the new disaster portals, which were introduced to you at Telecon in October. The Carillion team was the first partner to implement these portals, with several others implementing since then. Technology, though, goes hospital operations, and we're participating in several of your disaster drills to help us get these disaster portals even further enhanced in the near future. And today is going to dig deeper into the operational side of disaster readiness. Before I introduce her, I want to give a little bit more background. She's currently in her role at Carillion. She's responsible for all patient transfer and bed management activities, transfer and EDS dispatch, and emergency management integration. She has 3 years of pre-hospital EMS experience and nursing experience, including ICU, ED, and flight nursing. She served as a volunteer staff nurse for the Virginia DMAT since 2007. She's active with a K-9 search and rescue team and is currently an operational K-9 handler. Mel, thank you so much for everything that you do. You're a busy, busy girl, and I'm going to send it over to you, Mel.
Thank you very much, Joy, and I appreciate everyone's time today. Let me start out by apologizing. I'm battling the same wicked cold I think half the U.S. is right now, so hope my voice will make it. Kaylee, can you just confirm you can hear okay?
Yeah, sorry, okay. I was on mute.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk disasters, everyone's favorite topic. I know those of us in the bed placement world find out disasters a million different ways, just in normal operations and throughput every day. But from a disaster management standpoint, we really need to talk about what does bring up true disaster response criteria for us. And that can be, as this slide alludes to, the first things that come to our minds are usually things like natural events like a hurricane, earthquake, whatnot, but we need to plug in all the types of things that can happen. In today's world, we're worried about terrorist type events, or just be mass patient surge from a everyday occurrence that we see on this multi-vehicle accidents or not, or an event at a school or a large mass gathering in your area. So the way you plan for how you're going to handle that surge, no matter what the cause of the disaster is what's key. And you're going to hear me emphasizing a lot the importance of drilling for these types of instances, which we know our accrediting bodies expect us to do as well. Joint Commission in particular likes to see evidence of how we're drilling for these types of incidents. And then we're going to tie it in specifically to our hospital command centers, operations centers, whatever structure you have in place at your health system, why it's so important they tie it into that planning and looking ahead to not how I'm going to respond after the event happens, but how we are prepared to respond if and when it does happen, because I think that's the way we need to look at it today. It's not if it's going to happen. Something's going to happen. We hope it's not something too egregious, but we need to prepare for all levels. This is a nice overview I borrowed from Homeland Security, the guiding principles when they look at a national response framework. Again, you're just dealing with no matter what the disaster is. I think those key principles should speak to all of us. You've got to engage partnerships, not only within your four walls, or how many walls you have, but within your surrounding communities. So that could be at your local city level, expanding your regional level, and scaling all the way up, depending on the disaster size, to state or federal level. Because depending on the extent of the disaster, that's going to dictate which governing body, for a better word, is going to come in and take over that incident command. But you've got to have a solid framework within your own hospital of how your command, all hospitals do a good job, I think, of setting up some form of an incident command team. And I hope we've got some emergency management folks online. I just had the pleasure of serving as our interim emergency manager, filling that role for the past year here at Corellia until we onboarded a new one. And so I got to get up more close and personal with the responsibilities. If your bed placement, command center, whatever you call it, is not tightly aligned with your emergency manager, please make that happen. I hope you'll hear that as a theme in the presentation today. Those two groups really need to work closely together, and your command center can be a great resource for your emergency manager as well as his or her they have in place in their planning, not to mention drills you're doing with the community. So whatever you set up, you want to have good systematic EOPs in place and be able to scale them up or down based on what you're dealing with. Slide, you can see, just speaks to what I was referencing. There's different levels of government or accrediting agencies that will come in and handle disaster emergency preparedness. I like the map. I asked the tele folks to put that in there for me. I think it's pretty powerful when we look at, I don't know if everyone on the phone, what level you have of teletracking software in your hospitals, but to see that many players across the U.S. do have some form of the technology, the same technology, I think that's pretty powerful that we can share information. We're talking from a same platform. I think it's exciting to think about future state, how we can tie those platforms together for wide-scale emergencies, but I just thought that was a pretty powerful graphic to show that it's already out there. It's not consistently in every state, but it's pretty heavily represented in a lot of states, especially Florida. I mean, Florida, you should be very excited you've got that much representation down there in your area. An area that is more likely than others, unfortunately, to be hit with some sorts of natural disasters. And there's a bullet point there about the HVAs. Not directly involved with your hospital doing their AAs. Your emergency manager, of course, is usually overseeing that. I would suggest that you do get involved with that planning. That's required every year by Joint Commission. Hospitals put together where they think their highest vulnerabilities are, and then you need to plan your drills accordingly throughout the year. bed placement command centers need to be at the table when you're doing those reviews and talking about that, because you should be part of those drills no matter what the identified vulnerabilities are. So I encourage you to take an active spot at the table with that. And I can't imagine your emergency managers wouldn't welcome that. So look ahead, we're going to try to hit the highlights. We're going to talk about that updated CMC Emergency Preparedness Rule. Some of you may or may not be familiar with that. Any EM folks online, I know you're intimately familiar with that. That was a big deal. They made some pretty massive changes to that back in 2017. I think it went live in October of 2017, and what they are expecting hospitals to be, what level of preparedness. And that really just came out of, quite frankly, pastors over the past few years and hospitals who were getting the checkboxes done by Joint Commission when the folks came through and surveyed them, and they said, good, check, good to go. And then a natural disaster would happen, and unfortunately, in many cases, they found out the plans that were in place weren't adequate or had room for improvement. So they've added a lot of expectations under that CMC Emergency Preparedness Rule that should definitely involve your participation as well. Those disasters and patient surges, like I said, we deal with patient surges every day, not necessarily associated with a disaster, so to speak, even though they feel like it to us. But depending on size and scale, if you've not heard of the IBA terminology, the immediate bed availability, work with regional healthcare coalitions, which I'll speak to more here in a minute. From federal and state level, that's the buzzword, and what they are looking for hospitals to be able to give is they want you to surge up of your normal ability to bring in patients, and we'll talk about that more here in a minute. And, of course, we want to deep dive into what the role of your hospital operations center can be and should be during disasters. I'll linger very quickly on this, just give you background on our health system. We are Carilion Clinic. We're located in Southwest Virginia. We are an academic medical center, level trauma center. We have 6 additional campuses besides our main campus, and we are affiliated with the Virginia Tech Med School and Research Institute. So I had to ask, where do you think you are in this line? Are you the person they're calling for the 10 inches of snow, get your bread and milk before, which I'm guilty of sometimes? Or should you really take notice if you're standing in line with everyone else who has full pappers on and has enough water to meet 96-hour rule, which they're going to sustain if they lose everything at their house? So the question is, where do you think your health system is in this line? Which one do you look like? EM line will be the ones in the pappers, I assure you. Life here recently, as you all know, back in September, 1st of October of 18, we had those back-to-back hurricane instances. You were impacted more greatly than we were. The first was actually Hurricane Florence, and that's the one, I don't know about you all, we spent like a solid week in plan mode. We activated incident command for multiple days. That's the one I was expecting eventually a lot to happen, which it did a lot happen in some areas. Fortunately, we missed much except for some heavy rainfall from that. So fast forward to after Hurricane Florence came Hurricane Michael. I felt like our guard was kind of down. They weren't calling for much more except for some additional rains. And, of course, remember we already had saturated grounds from our heavy rains the week before. So while we were on some alert, we weren't at quite the heightened alert we were the week prior. So what you're looking at here is it's the front of Roanoke Memorial, our primary campus. It's taken from the employee garage looking out over. There's the Roanoke River runs right that close to our hospital. So we have a flood zone, floodplain. And I draw your attention to right here is the road people drive by, get to the hospital. Here's the walkway where employees walk. This is the main front entrance of the hospital where everyone goes in the front lobby. So we knew some heavy rains were coming. Again, not as heightened alert as before. And so within less than a 2-hour period, that same view in front of my hospital went from what you saw to that. So this filled water, and you can see the water came all the way up. It flooded. There were cars completely underwater in our front parking lot where our valets park. Water stopped just short of our front lobby door right there. So the fortunate part was it did not, we do put some flood barriers up here in front of the front doors and windows, but the water did not breach inside the hospital, but sure came close. And we've had that happen years ago. I think the flood of 84 is when we had our last major flood breach into the hospital walls. But as you can see, I mean, it happened in less than 2 hours. Everyone was scrambling, and you go to, that's when you're immediately thinking, prepare for potentially water's going to the hospital, and what does that mean for our ambulances coming in and out? Do we need to evacuate? I didn't have to go to that level. We didn't have to evacuate, fortunately, but it goes to prove how quickly something can happen, and I don't want to be having to start from ground zero when something like this happens to think, okay, what do we do? How are we going to start an evacuation process? How are we going to call in regional resources? How are we going to communicate needs? I do have a few minutes going on. These bullet points are copied directly from that CMS Preparedness Rule I spoke of, went into effect back in 2017. And there's a lot of other parts to that rule, so I encourage those who are not familiar with it to your emergency manager and go through all of it. Some of it impacts inpatient hospital areas one way versus an ambulatory area another way, but a lot of it will impact your centers as far as how you should be tied to this. So they're requiring all health systems to have some system, they're not dictating how, to track the location of your on-duty staff while they're on site during emergencies, and that's even if they're not working a shift. So a lot of times, as you know, even during snow events, you've got staff who come in and know they not be able to get back and forth to work, so they ask to be sheltered somewhere, either hospital or at a local hotel. And so a way to track those, as well as patients who are sheltering, family members who are there visiting, patients who have technically discharged but can't leave the building, or, as you know, hospitals are subject to, during any kind of, especially if it involves power outage or loss of water, everyone seems to flock to a hospital because they think that's somewhere I can always go to get my electronics charged, I can get fed, there will be food there. So anybody sheltering in your facility, CMS is going to expect you to have a way to track those. And we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about TeleTracking solutions, how we put that in place. You have to have arrangements in place with other hospitals and providers to receive patients in the event that your operations, like you lose continuity of operations, whether it be partial or full. So whatever agreements you have, MO you have in place, you can be able to show that there's a plan for that. This next bullet point is very important, and I'll speak to that a little bit from the receiving end when I go out with the DMAT teams. You've got to have a method for sharing information. Medical documentation when you're evacuating patients out. Perfect world, I'll be on the same EMR, but as you know, we are not, and that includes the federal government. When I'm in a DMAT tent, we have nothing close to the EMR any health systems use. So you need a quick and easy way to some form of, and think you may be in a situation where you've lost power. You can't for your usual electronic documents that you're used to. So you have a systematic way to send that records with that patient they're evacuating out. Also, to providing information about the general condition and location of patients. I know I work closely with my marketing communications team here, my hospital PIO. They're going to be flooded with calls, whether it's a surge of patients that's come in. Say there was a mass shooting at a concert in your area, and you've got 6 patients that have influxed in. They're going to get a million questions about the conditions of those 60 patients, and you're going to need to know. Of the 60, you're going to still be dealing with 700 patients potentially, but how are you going to flag and track those 60 patients that everyone's going to have a heightened level of questions about in your system? So we'll speak about that again with the technology in a minute. And then, of course, you need to be able to routinely provide information to your region, both back and forth, what you can provide if another institution or facility loses continuity of operations, or like if you yourself are the ones losing continuity, you need to be able to communicate that back and forth and what you're able to provide in an emergency. That needs to be quick, real-time data. It can't be just something on file, because what you can routinely provide today may be what you can provide next week when there's an emergency happening. So we all probably do this differently, but I think it's very important for you to ask yourself internally how you do share with your partners in your region real-time information. Here in Virginia, we have a strong, we call it RHCC, the Regional Healthcare Coalitions, very strong RHCC network, which I'm grateful to have access to. I know other states utilize those as well. I don't know if all the states do. Your state Department of Health will get involved at certain levels of disaster preparedness, and use regional bed boards as well, which I'll show you some screenshots here in a minute. These are things, especially the regional bed board, we routinely fill that out at least once a day. So that's something we play like we play like we practice. Every night we're updating the regional bed board. Anyone in the state can look and see what our bed availability is at a high level. So it's not, if to have something like that, and you'll see some shots of what ours looks like, but the daily use of that is so critical because you know those low volume, especially from the nurses know, if it's a low volume procedure or piece of equipment that you don't use very often, you feel like you're having to retrain how to use it. You really need to pull it out and dust off the cobwebs. And if you're dealing with an electronic bed board, like a regional bed board, you're going to end up ultimately dealing with people who forgot their login, or their login's expired, or they don't remember the link to get to it. So this is really important that we do this every day, and so it's, my staff knows it like the back of their hand, and it's whether, thankfully, normal ops, hopefully 364 days out of the year, but the one day we need to report something urgent, because they've been doing it every day, the muscle memory's there, and they can do it without even thinking about it. Drills, I'm going to keep bringing that up. Like I said, you should be partnering with your hospital emergency managers to incorporate your center, your department, whatever structure is, into as many of the drills as possible that EM's doing throughout the year. They're doing them, whether you're present or not. You have to do so many tabletops per year, in addition to so many full-scale exercises per year. That's a requirement from CMS Joint Commission. So make sure you are playing during those drills, and they will very much appreciate the role you can play in that. That's going to help you build the technology solutions like the custom portals we built. You can have those built in advance and let your staff practice and play with those during a drill process, which is much less stressful than having to use it for the first time in a real event. Back mentioned earlier, the immediate bed availability. Again, this is what our regional healthcare coalitions are expecting of us. We're to be able to create, however we do it internally, just basically put up in excess of 20% of staffed hospital beds within a 4-hour period once a disaster is declared. So that's a difficult task, as anybody knows who's in bed placement. Usually the primary hospitals can accomplish that is, of course, looking at your discharges, get the door quicker. Even those pending discharges, can we flip those to confirmed, even though we thought they were going to be in here a little longer? And then all of that's going to require some form of real-time identification on your, whatever you're using, electronic bed board. You don't, 4 hours is a short period when you've got a disaster occurring, so this can't be someone walking around with a clipboard asking floors to move out. How many ambulances do we need? How many buses do we need? This has got to be real-time information, again, that we're used to communicating every day, and you're just upping the ante, and that you need to just up the beds to a 20% level. Goes on to add to those pillars of the IBA, and like I said, usually in our world, the discharges are the ones we're looking at, are lower acuity. Some of us have the, but the option of, if you have multiple campuses in your system, maybe you can offload or transfer some of the less acute patients from the primary campus off to the secondary campuses, which of course is easier than as well, even when you're talking about your own campuses. And also to add to the complexity of trying to do something like this, the resources needed to move these patients. If there's a major event going on that has caused you to declare a disaster, I can almost guarantee you that your normal transport resources are going to be much stretched than normally, because they're probably dealing with whatever caused the disaster, either bringing patients into you or dealing with the weather that's caused the disaster. So that's the kind of things you need to talk through on your drill. Don't assume you've got normal resources available to you during an actual disaster. And of course, that final bullet point is one of the most critical for our operations centers, and that's tracking and documentation of anything associated with the disaster itself. But it doesn't matter so much the deep dive content, but this is just a quick screenshot of what Virginia uses, our VHA system. That's that bed boards referencing. We go in and fill out think my staff goes in and does it like at 5 a.m. every day, and it's just an update just so everyone knows it's not old data that's been sitting there and hasn't been touched for a month. Every day we update, yep, we're at normal stops. Hey, our ICUs are full. Hey, our PEDS area is full. Our NICU's at capacity. And this is really quick. I mean, it takes my staff less than 2 minutes to do. Just go to a web link, and then they update the status of our hospital. And that's a view of one of the tabs on the VHA site where you can see that first line. I apologize, it's a little blurry. It says diversion status. So if you're going on some kind of special diversion, like, hey, our NICU's full, we can't take any NICU babies. And this is real. Everyone who's in Virginia, you can go to this shared site. All the health systems are members of this. And so you can log in and see across the state what the status of the other hospitals are. As an example, when you have an actual event go on, and this was a screenshot from the Hurricane Florence week, we have special event logs so you can communicate specific concerns for your facility. Specifics, I believe it was a skilled facility down in the Danville area, and they were worried about, they had exceptionally high levels where the rivers were cresting, and they were worried about getting some generators and dealing with pumping water out of their facility. So they were communicating that specifically on the event log for that specific hurricane. You can see this was a whole log page for the Hurricane Florence event. Your commander, your center, your bed placements, or whatever you call it, please ensure that that team is tied in with your incident command team. In fact, we send at least one member of our operations center to sit in the incident command room when we've got an active event, and that includes drills. The division of information you need between those two rooms is critical. So the more, again, that those two teams get together and know how to share information, you just get stronger and stronger, and you identify further needs for future planning. The big things that we expected, I think it's critical of an operations center. You know, we all page doctors all day. Our nurses are sitting there calling for transfers. So we learned quickly, well, we know how to page the on-call doctor, but what if we've got that with a surge of 60 PEDS patients coming in? Do we quickly know how to page all of the pediatric surgeons, all of the pediatric intensivists, and basically do a service line call out for an emergency? And so we've got those separate individual service line teams building algorithms, how you want CTAC's the name of my center, how CTAC is going to communicate with all my doctors if there's some mass casualty event going on and we need all doctors to be notified. Also, I spoke about our RHCCs, our regional healthcare coalitions. We entered an agreement with them. We staff their hotline. So if anybody in our Southwest region is activating the RHCC, we get early because we're answering the line for them. They're not staffed 24/7. We are, so we offered to let them put a phone in our center. So anytime anyone at any healthcare system needs assistance, they call in here, and then we send electronic communications to the RHCC staff that they need to activate. Talking about the bed updates to the region, ability to track patients, and then that's just remember your centers are the central source for any kind of that information, whether it's mass influx in or evacuation out. Needs. That's what we hope none of us are ever faced with, and I believe some of you on the phone may have been faced with that, so you could speak to this better than me, but those of you who have gone through with it know how chaotic that can be to at least start collecting the data of who you're pushing out. And I've already spoken to you need to be able to send the medical record information out adequately with them. But Operation Center, again, perfect place where you've got people 24/7 dedicated to handling nothing but looking at patient throughput and patient information as far as placement. We'll see in a second. I want to quickly transition to our portals, how we're tracking if those patients were to be evacuated out, where they're going, contact numbers, what time left, final destination. Real quickly, and Ann Mitchell, I'm going to go ahead and tee up. She's on the line with me. She is one of our rock star admins for our teletracking software here at Carillion. And so, Ann, if you don't mind, I'd like you to come off mute and walk us through. These are custom, next few slides, our final slides we're going through. These are custom portals that she built for us in teletracking to address a lot of those bullet points we talked about earlier. So, Amber, do you mind driving us through the tabs here that you've built? Amber?
Yep, can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
I'm so
Go ahead.
sorry. Hey, good afternoon. So as you can see across the top, we have 5 basic tabs. One where we have all of the patients that are being evacuated. And, of course, we used others to pull those types of patients onto these tabs. Our next tab is our shelter and surge patients. And by creating like a patient record for these patients, then that allows us to put them on this tab. And that, as you can see, we've got like a ID tag number for them, what patient that they may be associated with, where their belongings are, other needs, even down to like where their animals are. And then we also have their assignments out to the side, so we're putting them. We did something very similar for staffing, included where that staff was going to be, what shift they were working, what their assignment was, with the thought that if had an influx of one area, you would also know who you could pull and where they were at. And then we have our discharge rounds. And this will show you kind of like where everyone is and what's going on with those patients. And again, this is just using those advanced filters that we're also familiar with to make sure that we're getting that information that you need. And then the very last one is all of your patients. So all your disaster patients, if you had that were coming from a mass shooting, when they're tagged, we know where they are at all times and what the status of it is when people are asking for updates.
And this is we just got this built in the past, it was after the hurricane event. So excited to use these. We're getting ready to set up our first full drill to utilize these portals in the next month or two. And her, like Rockstar, was able to build those here internally in a matter of hours. So technology was already there. She just had to customize it for what we wanted in the field. Just real quick, that's a picture. I chuckle every time I look at this. So I go from this high technology enriched atmosphere of where we work out of our centers to going to this when I'm deployed with a DMAT team. That's what the shelters look like we set up typically when we're leaving patients from hospitals who have evacuated. So the lack of technology is starkly different in the shelter situation here than what I'm used to is an understatement. But you can imagine when you're just filling people in cots, how to keep track of who's who, where they came from. It goes back to the medical documentation that needs to come with them. I can't do enough I need to emphasize the importance of having a centralized point of contact with hospitals who are involved in these either evacuation situations or whatever the disaster is, for us to have and we would love it if every hospital had a command center that we could talk directly to. But of course, then when you get to this level of disaster, you've got multiple levels of government agencies involved, so that always complicates things. Already spoken to that, the communication, like I just said, between whoever's running the disaster management and then from the hospital level, how you're communicating, and just having a systematic way to do that and so that you're doing that the same way every time is so helpful to cut down the case on the hospital side. Finally, I always put a plug in for this book. I don't have anything to do with the book. I get no commission from the book. I have met Sherry Fink, the author, who's amazing, but I first speak at a regional talk here for the folks, and if you have not read this book, I cannot recommend it highly enough. 5 Days Memorial. It's spent years interviewing and getting real-time accounts from folks who went through Hurricane Katrina, especially at the Herman Memorial Facility. So it's a great read. It'll really make you question a lot about what you do and probably lose a few nights of sleep about how you need to improve things, where you're doing it, because we can all improve at the hospital level. But it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. And like that, please, I'm going to end with begging you to not only get involved with your EM teams, but make sure you're actively drilling with them. You will have lessons learned coming out of every time you drill, for those of you who haven't gone through them. And in the end, it's going to benefit your whole institution and your patients. But the more you can drill with them, the more you realize how much technology solutions like TeleTracking are our best friend during events like this. And that's out of our center out here where I am today. You're looking from the half of the room, that's right side is my communication specialists who are dispatching the ambulances and helicopters, and the other side of the room you can see the tele boards who are running the bed management side. So, Kaylee, if you wanted to had any questions you want to run real quick, I know we're at time, but appreciate everyone's attention and interest in this. I appreciate all the good work everybody's out there doing for preparedness, and I get excited every time I go to a conference and can collaborate with you guys, because I learn from everyone else too. We certainly have all the answers, but this is something we need to put our heads together and continue to push the envelope on better solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much on behalf of everyone from TeleTracking. I think my favorite thing about Melanie is I learn something new from you every time I hear you speak or you present for us or we just have a chat. So your wealth of knowledge, and we cannot do this without you. So I just want to say thank you. We have a couple of questions here, and in the interest of time, anything that comes through on the chat pane that we can't cover on the call, we'll do a recap blog for you and send that out to everybody else on the line over the next few days. So first question is, who in the hospital should be involved in your drills? Can you go through that a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually your emergency manager will kind of lead that structure. We have a multidisciplinary incident command team, so we have presentation from your house administrators, your whatever you call your nurse supervisors, physician leadership. We have heavy ER component, OR component. The best way to answer that is I try to fast forward to worst case scenario. That's just the emergency management side of me background. So if you are having to do something massive at a large scale in your hospital, i.e. evacuate or urge up 20% of your beds, I try to think of who are the key players that can make that happen. And we have a daily bed huddle, operations huddle we call it. It's usually the people that are in your daily huddle. So that includes people like your environmental services leaders, your transporter folks who move folks from floor to floor. So I know we're short on time, but think about who the key players are. Think of worst case scenario and who you need to be at the table to make that happen, the moves you're going to have to make.
Okay. One last one here before we let you off the line. Is there any way that you can share some examples of the type of information that you're asked for or you need to report on during a disaster?
So immediate thought go to, they definitely want to know what ready available beds you have right now and what level of care those beds are for. So how many ICU, adult ICU, how many pediatric ICU, and so on, medical PCU, medical med-surg. Also the capacity of your ER, how much can your ER take on and what level patient your ER take. Are they a level 1 trauma center? Are they a burn center? So the immediate questions on any disaster is, what for now? What can you serve up to for the now? And sometimes that's not the same answer as what I can keep for the next 24 hours. Our level 1 ER may be able to take X number of patients in now just to stabilize them, but they're going to have to quickly look at other areas of the state to transfer to for, continuity of care. So your ER, OR, and immediate bed availability is probably the top 3 things that folks are going to want you to report. And transport resources is another quick ask. Do you need offer, or if you need it, how many do you need?
All right, so the last and final page here of the presentation, just wanted to say thank you to our rock star, Melanie. You are just so wonderful, and we're so glad to have you as a part of our Tele family. And thank you to Amber, who is also just a wonderful asset to the Carillion team and to us at TeleTracking. So just real quickly, wanted to share, we have a couple upcoming webinars. If you've not seen our new Synapse Enterprise Analytics solution, we'll want you to join us on February 22nd at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time, and the link to register is included there, but we'll also share it in the follow-up email. And then we're super, super excited about our Transfer Center IQ solution that's rolling out as well. And that's going to be happening on Friday, March 1st at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, the link will be included in the follow-up email. So stay tuned. Look for an email from Kaylee Fontana. It should come out either this afternoon or early Monday. If you're also going to be in Orlando next week for the HIMSS trade show, Melanie is stopping by, so you can speak with her in person on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon from 3 to 6 p.m. in booth 1521. You can ask her about what you learned here on today's session, or you can just stop by and meet her because she's wonderful. So stay tuned again for that email from us. And just again, on behalf of everybody from TeleTracking, thank you. We know you're super busy, but you always make time for us and for our clients. So hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we will talk to you all later. Take care. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.